What's up, everybody? I'm Matt Gary, and on this episode of Coding with the Force, we're going to go over what scratch orgs are in Salesforce, when to use them, and how to set them up. Alright guys, so in this video we are going to go over scratch orgs. We are going to figure out why you would ever want to use a scratch org as opposed to a developer org. We're going to figure out what a scratch org actually is, and we are going to figure out how to set up the developer hub within your production environment, or really I'm going to show you in a development environment, but same either way. And we are going to go over how to set up a scratch org in both Visual Studio Code and Illuminated Cloud 2. So by the time this is over, you should have a really good understanding of what they are and how to set them up, and they should be, hopefully, I hope anyway, a lot less confusing. But really quick, before we start this video and get into all the magical technical stuff, there's a few things that I want to make you guys aware of, just in case you didn't know. The first of which is, if you head over to the community tab of this YouTube channel, you get to vote on next week's video. So if you didn't know, every single video I do, you guys get to vote on every single week. So if you want to see the videos that you want to see, head over to the community tab, vote on next week's video. So, you know, you get to see what you want to see. The second thing is, starting this month and every month going forward, 2 random subscribers and 2 random people that share this content, if you like it enough, on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, blah, 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 and tag me in it, will get free certifications on me. So if you want a free Salesforce cert, you can get that. So just feel free to share those or subscribe, and a few of you every month will get free certs, which is pretty cool. It's all thanks to your donations to this channel that I'm able to give those things to everyone. So thank you for that, all of you random donators. And the last thing is, if you want to see this channel continue to grow and to expand, and for more free things, I suppose, to be given out to this community, if you have the extra cash and you like this channel enough, consider getting a membership on the channel. You get free cool things with it. You get some cool free emojis. You get access to a Discord channel where you can talk to me directly. You get extra voting rights, and you get extra shirt, or you get a cool shirt, and that all depends on what tier you choose. But all that money does go back into this channel, or it goes back into the open source community. So yeah, I don't really keep any of it. I give it all back to you guys, but it helps expand this and make the channel quite a bit better. So now that that's over, let's get into why you would want to use a scratch org, the good stuff, the stuff that you actually care about in this video. So why would you want to use a scratch org? There are a couple really good reasons. The first that I want to go over is, I feel like a less of a known reason, but I use it pretty frequently. If you didn't know, because scratch orgs are temporary in nature, they only last for up to 30 days, you can demo pretty much any feature that you can think of that Salesforce has made or has created, right? So for instance, not too long ago, I needed to create a proof of concept for Lightning Scheduler. This is not necessarily super easy to set up in a regular developer org. I would need to install a package and have licenses and all that kind of stuff, but simple enough. And scratch orgs just takes me a couple seconds to set up a definition file for a scratch org and set up a scratch org with Lightning Scheduler in it. Same kind of thing if your organization wanted to demo B2B cloud, or Lightning Field Service, or something along those lines, these paid add-ons that require licenses and all that kind of stuff, just to get into, you can actually take a look at them all for free in Scratchworks. So whether it's because you need to build something for work, or just to see if it will work for you all, or if it's just because you're interested as a developer about learning about all these different things, Scratchworks really enable you to learn about a bunch of areas of Salesforce that otherwise are a pain to get into. Also, you can set up things like, if you've never done it, person accounts are kind of a pain to set up. It makes person account setups way easier. So if you wanted to demo person accounts, it's pain free in a Scratchwork. So that's the first one, and I just kind of want to go over that because I feel like it's less utilized, but it should be, because it's very useful, at least in my world. The second thing is, as far as why you would use Scratchworks, the big thing here is a concept that I think is kind of tough for most legacy Salesforce developers, or just Salesforce developers maybe in general, to wrap their heads around. But it's because of how we have developed for so long in the Salesforce ecosystem. So it's not like, don't worry about it. We'll go over it and we'll figure it out. But it's to change your source of truth, right? And to be able to hopefully anyway, take smaller chunks of your metadata, put them into application-specific packagings, and just work and iterate on those smaller pieces of your org quicker. That's kind of confusing, and we'll go over a little more about why that's a little confusing and what I mean by that in just a minute. But basically, unlike developer orgs, Scratch orgs are built or created without any metadata in them. So if you refreshed a developer org or created a developer org from your production environment, that developer org is going to get all of the metadata from your production org, right? It's going to get all the Apex classes and Lightning Web Components and Aura components and any configuration that you've done, like custom objects and fields and custom metadata types, and on and on and on. But if you create a Scratch org, that's not true. You're not going to have any metadata in that Scratch org at all. It's metadata free, which is actually kind of useful sometimes. And what that allows you to do is, instead of your giant, what is referred to as happy soup of an org being your source of truth, you can have these more modular packages to work with, right? Now you're creating the Scratch org that is metadata independent. It doesn't have any metadata in it, and you get to choose what to send up to it to work on, right? So this is a concept that I think for a good portion of Salesforce developers, not necessarily developers in general, but Salesforce developers especially, to think about, because until the last several years, this really hasn't been how we could do things, at least not easily. You could, but it's just not, it wasn't intuitive, right? There were no real tools to facilitate this. But we've been so used to working in that, we copy down our whole org into a dev org, and then we work on it, that's kind of been ingrained in our minds. You expect a new org to have all the metadata from your production org, but that's actually kind of detrimental in some cases. And I guess let me explain why. say you have a bunch of apps in your organization, right? Say you have multiple, let's start even broader. Say you have multiple business units in your organization. You've got, we'll just say generally like a sales department that works in your Salesforce org, and you've got a marketing department in your Salesforce org. And in the sales department, they have like, I don't know, a mapping application that allows them to easily see stores close to each other that they can, travel to and potentially make sales at, right? And in the marketing department, you maybe have some kind of outreach component that allows them to gather contacts and send outreach to them to market your products effectively. Well, these are two different Salesforce apps in the same org, right? Wouldn't it be great if we could decouple these, put them in their own packages, put the sales app in its own package and the marketing app in its own package, and have them be independent entities? And then you could send, if you needed to expand upon the marketing app in your org, you could send that just up to your Scratch org and work on it. You could obviously create that Scratch org quite a bit faster. Number one, if you didn't know, Scratch orgs get created in like seconds most of the time, and instead of hours or days. And you could just iterate on that marketing app or that sales app in your Scratch org. And that has a lot of benefits. Number one, you can break your development teams into smaller pieces. So you can have a team that's just worried about the marketing app and one that's just worried about the sales app, and you can iterate faster on those applications. You can enhance them quicker because there's not all these like dependencies linking things together. And I could go on and on about this. It's a tough concept to wrap your head around, especially as a Salesforce developer, because you're so used to everything kind of like being together in one giant metadata clump, right? But it really probably shouldn't be like that. And what we should be striving for as developers and architects are these decoupled independent apps that you can quickly iterate on and make changes to. And that, I think, anyway, is really the ultimate goal with Scratch orgs and unlock packages, is to give you as a developer the tools to kind of work with that mindset, and to be able to pull the pieces of your org out and just focus on those pieces as opposed to focusing on everything in the org, right? It promotes that architecture, which is a better way to think of it as opposed to just one giant conglomerate of metadata. Now, could you have thought about it that way, even 10 years ago? Absolutely. But, there was nothing to kind of facilitate that. And it was a little more challenging to set that up, especially if you wanted an org with just application A's metadata or just application B's metadata. That would have been a pain. So anyway, there's the what a Scratch org is and why you'd want to use a Scratch org. You'd want to use, like I said, you'd want to use a Scratch org so that you have really a different source of truth and a different way to iterate on your products in a more refined fashion, I suppose. There's a bunch of other benefits of Scratch orgs that I don't know that I'll go over, but like you can easily spin up tons of Scratch orgs at once. Using the Salesforce CLI, you can feed data to them. You can just send metadata that you actually care about, that you as a developer are actually working on, so you don't have to think about all the other junk. And it promotes really scratch orgs and unlock packages together. Although you don't need unlock packages, both of them help promote the idea of this kind of more granular application by application approach to development in Salesforce, as opposed to one mega org that you just are constantly iterating on, which is not a good thing, especially as your org grows. So, all right, I feel like I've rambled on enough about that. Hopefully you get the kind of gist of it. Let's go over how to actually set up a scratch org. And we will start by setting one up in Visual Studio Code. All right, so the first thing that we're actually going to do is learn how to set up a DevHub in our orgs. So you can do this in a development environment, you can do this in a production environment, but let's just go over how to set it up. That is the wrong window. This is the right one. So if I'm over here in my Salesforce org, I've logged into my Salesforce org, and I go to Setup. So you'll want to click on the gear up here, go to Setup. And over here in the search bar, type in Dev, which will bring you to DevHub. And here within the DevHub, you just need to check this Enable DevHub, your toggle to switch, right? Once you enable it, you can't disable it. So there's not a lot of risk here, really, unless you're giving random people administrative access or access to create scratch orgs. At least, you don't actually have to give people very much access to create scratch orgs in your DevHub. But anyway, there's not a lot of risk here. So if you enable it, you can't disable it. But as long as you're not giving weird people access to create DevHubs, you're probably fine. Anyway, but definitely be careful of it. Make sure that it's right for your org, all that kind of stuff, because you can't turn it off. Anyway, so you enable this, and once you do, you can all of a sudden start creating scratch orgs. And once this is done, what you will do is go over to Visual Studio Code, and I'll just start from scratch here, and I'll open a new window, and we'll create a new project together. So I will just do SFDX create project. So if you didn't know, number one, if you don't know anything about the Visual Studio Code IDE and how to set it up for Salesforce, I'm not going to go over it in this video, but I have a video that goes over it, and I will link it up above, and you can check it out and then come back to this one. So I'm going to set this up with a standard project template, and I'm going to name this Scratch Org Demo, because why not? Yeah, so many things. Separation of concerns folder. That was a fun one. Okay, and yes, I do trust the author personally of those files. Okay, so I have created a new SFDX project, Salesforce DX project. Basically, it's just a folder setup, more or less, with a bunch of nice fancy things in it. And the next thing that we need to do in here is, yeah, I know you can't query my org. Sorry, just throwing some errors down there. And the next thing that we need to do is actually authorize a DevHub, right? So we're going to do that. We are going to hit Control-Shift-P or Command-Shift-P on a Mac and go down to SFDX, authorize a DevHub, and click on it. And it should open up a window where I have the ability to log in. So it just automatically opens up this login.salesforce.com window, and I can click on this to log in and authorize a DevHub. which is pretty cool. And if I go back here now, I don't think you can read all of it, but it says that authorizing a dev org, a dev hub successfully ran. So, and if you have the output area up in Visual Studio Code, it'll let you know that it actually authorized appropriately, which it did, which is cool. So the next thing that we need to do is set up our scratch org definition file, which I believe can be found in config. Yes. So in the Salesforce DX file structure that they set up for you in the config folder that automatically gets generated for you, you'll get this project scratch definition JSON file. And all this is literally a JSON object, right? It allows you to basically choose all of the different things that you want in your org when it gets set up, because really, if you didn't know, you don't get features enabled for you in scratch orgs unless you tell the scratch org to enable the feature, and that's actually a lot of things. A lot of things, like being able to author Apex or create workflows or communities or whatever else. You have to explicitly state that in your features. And there is an enormous list of features that you can leverage. Let me see if I can bring those up for you. I've got them bookmarked somewhere here. Here they are. So there are an enormous list of features that you can enable in your scratch org. And this is kind of a confusing thing. I think this whole scratch org definition file is what scares a pretty decent amount of people off from even setting up a scratch org, which, by the way, I will say you don't need to do if you use Illuminated Cloud 2 instead of Visual Studio Code. But I've already stated my opinion on why I think it is vastly superior. And no one is paying me to say that, so they have no reason to. Anyway, the scratch org definition file allows you to determine which features you want to add, right? So, do you want the ability to author Apex? Do you want to have B2B commerce enabled for you? All of these things. All of these are here, and they describe every single one to you. I'll put this in the description so that you can check this out if you're creating your own, and all that kind of stuff. If you didn't know, Wave Platform is Tableau Analytics, so just as a heads up if you're trying to mess with that. Long ago, it used to be called Wave Analytics, but I'm digressing. Anyway, so scratch org features. There is a huge list of them. They are extremely important to think about and get right. Otherwise, you'll set up a scratch org and it won't really work right. Not that that's the end of the world, because you can easily just delete the scratch org and create another one. But, wasting too much time is never too fun. So, anyway, so maybe I'll just set it up like a Lightning scheduler, just so we can see the cool stuff, right, that you can do to also just demo applications. So we'll set up a few things. Number one thing that I like to do is always enable this set password and API, so I can set my password or reset it if I want to in my scratch org, because otherwise it's a little easier to work with in IDEs when you know your password and you can set things up, especially with Illuminated Cloud 2. Let's see, we'll add author Apex. And I don't know what else we want. Maybe I want record types. I'm just trying to really show you the amount of things that you have to think about. Do I want service cloud users? Do I want to be able to use record types? Do I need to enable Service Cloud itself? All of these things are things you have to think about when you're setting up your features for your scratch orgs. And let me just state, it seems weird the first time you set this up. But again, once you start forming these smaller, more granular applications like we talked about in the beginning of this video, you kind of just have these scratch definition files ready to go, right? You kind of just build them for each application that you're going to be potentially iterating on, and then you don't really come back to them unless something substantial changes. So they require a lot of thought up front, and then in the long run, maybe a bit less so. The other thing you have to think about are settings, right? And this is a little more complicated and a little bit more of a pain to deal with. So these settings actually come from the metadata API. And in the metadata API, there are, well, they even talk about it, but a little bit. But there are these different settings that you can enable in your org. And there are metadata representations of that are in XML that you basically have to translate to JSON. So for instance, if you wanted to, this might be a bad example. Let's see, Lightning Experience settings. We can find that one down here, I think. There's Lightning Experience settings. And if we wanted to enable basically Lightning Experience for desktop, then we would find whatever that was, enable S1 desktop enabled. And as you can see, this has a description that states, indicates whether Lightning Experience is turned on in the org or not. After it is enabled, this setting can't be disabled via the user interface or API. Do you have to do these settings? No. I mean, obviously you can go into your scratch org afterwards and manually set them up, but that's really not ideal. You just need to figure out what in your org needs to be pre-set up for you, and look through the metadata API and figure out what those settings are. For some people, this settings list might go on and on and on, and for others, this might literally be all there is. So it just depends on the org, but this is a bit more of a pain to go through because you have to look through all of these metadata API settings and figure out which things should be enabled by default and which ones shouldn't, and more importantly, you know, how do you represent that as JSON? I mean, that's not very challenging, I don't think, but it's still something you have to think about. So that's where the settings come from. I will link all of the settings page as well in the description, so you can go check it out if you're trying to set up your own scratch orgs. And yet again, it is a pain, just to reiterate this point, it's a pain the first time you set it up. But again, once you set up these definition files for your scratch orgs, for your various applications that you're iterating on, you don't have to come back to these too often, right? Like, you know, every once in a while you will. You'll get a new feature enabled and or a big release, and you have to add new things to these scratch org definitions, but you know, not all the time. So okay, and I'm actually going to remove the space in this name. You can have spaces, but I'm just not a space guy. And you could change this if you wanted to an Enterprise Edition org or whatever else. You can change your editions to really any of them, because like I've stated before, these are all temporary orgs, so Salesforce really doesn't care too much what you do in them. All right, so we've got our scratch definition JSON file set up. So let's actually create the scratch org. I forget what this is. If I can create a default scratch org, which is what we want. So there's an Salesforce CLI command to create a default Scratch org that this is going to run in the background. And we want it to actually use our project Scratch definition JSON, but again, we could make it use a completely different one. If we had multiple Scratch org definitions for our various applications, you could have them all declared in here, and you could pick which one you want to use. And I'm just going to go with the one I just updated, which is the project Scratch definition JSON, and then you can give this org whatever name you want. So I am again going to call it Scratch org demo, which it already has in there, so I'm just going to leave it alone and hit enter. And then it'll let you choose the number of days until it expires or basically ceases to exist. I'm fine with 7, but I could set it to 1, anywhere from 1 to 30. And it's going to go out and actually create that Scratch org for me. Unless you have a lot going on in your org, it's typically not going to take too long, just a matter of a couple minutes. So we'll see. Deploying the metadata there is really the part that can oftentimes take quite a bit longer, depending on how much metadata you have for each individual application in your org. So we'll see. If this takes much longer, I'll cut the video and come back, but it will hopefully be done soon. Okay, it ran. Cool. So we have successfully created a default Scratch org. Now we can open the default org. So there's a, if you do the Control-Shift-P to open the command palette, there's a command called open default org, and we'll open it. And it'll take a minute, but it'll open my Scratch org. And it did. It just did it on my other screen over here. And yeah, so we have got our Scratch org up and running, and we can actually, I can't remember where Lightning Scheduler ends up. And here it is, Salesforce Scheduler setup. We can see that it was set up with Lightning Scheduler, and I can start messing with things, figuring out how it works, all that kind of stuff. Simple, easy, painless. Took a matter of minutes instead of hours, really. Now, at this point, you might be asking like a ton of additional questions. Tons. I mean, there's still tons of questions to be answered here. Like, how do I actually delete this org? You know, if I want to delete it before the 7 days are up. How do I change my default dev org? And how do I push data to this org, right? Like, how do I push the metadata from either source control or maybe another dev org to this Scratch org, right? All great questions, which there are relatively simple answers to. So I'll just do something real simple. I'll just create a new Apex class. That is not what I wanted to do. I want to create a new Apex class, and we'll call it, I don't know, demo push or something. Whatever, it's not important. I've created an Apex class at this point, right? And we'll just save it. And I want to actually, well, it's going to just automatically do it for me because I have this setting enabled in VSCode that's going to automatically push it to my Scratch org. And I'll show you what that setting is. I actually go over it in my other tutorial video. But if I go to Preferences, Setting, Extensions, way down here, I think, Salesforce Features, you have the option to push or deploy on save. You might want to do that, you might not want to do that. In my case, typically I do, but there's a lot of scenarios where you don't actually want that. This is the wrong org. So let's maybe find the right one. No promises. Here we go. And if I open the dev console in here to keep it easy, just to see that we actually moved it, you can see demo push is here, right? Simple, easy. I had to do nothing, right? I pushed it up there. But maybe you want to push a lot of things all at once, right? There is a command in the command palette called push source to default scratch org, and there's also one that says override conflicts. That, if your scratch org is brand new, you shouldn't have any conflicts, but use this one sparingly unless you really know what you're doing, and you're not overriding any code you shouldn't. This will actually push whatever I have in here up to my org. So if I turned off that feature, so let's just turn off the push or deploy on save feature, just so I can show you this. And I created a couple new classes, so we'll create an Apex class, call it, we'll just keep going with the demo push 1, and we'll create another one called demo push 2, and save things. You can see they are not deploying this time. So we've got demo push 1, demo push 2, Apex classes. They have not been deployed into that org, which we can maybe find out if I can figure out which screen is which, and pull up the dev console. They are currently not here, but if we go back to VSCode and I run that push source to default scratch org, it's going to push it. So if I reopen this now, we should see them all in here, I hope. And yeah, now we've got demo push 1, 2, blah, blah, blah. So if, you had all this stuff in version control, right? Or your source control, rather. Then you would, basically pull all that into your org, right? And just deploy it all at the same time. So you'd pull it all into your VS Code project and deploy it up there. There are actually a lot of other ways to do that. You don't necessarily even have to pull it into your VS Code project to deploy it to your scratch org. You could do it in different ways using the Salesforce CLI, but I think you get the picture. You can push a bunch of metadata at once into your org to get it set up, right? So you get your general definition of what should be enabled by default, what features you want in your org or need in your org, and then you pull the metadata that you want and push it up into your org. Now, if you wanted to delete this org, that's pretty simple too. I'll actually go over that in a second. There is no, not there. A way to kind of manually change the default org. You can just change, if I had multiple orgs, so if I created a scratch org, so if I created another default scratch org, I would then have 2, right? So if I created another default scratch org, I'd do it from project scratch definition JSON. I can only do one more of these, I think. And I called this, well, I could delete some, but, and I called this scratch org demo 2, right? And we'll make it 2 days there. It's going to create that scratch org, and it should update this file, I think, automatically, but we'll see. I'll close it so it doesn't have any problems doing its thing in the background there. It's thinking about creating the scratch org. It's probably going to take a second. I might cut and come back to it because even I'm getting tired of listening to me talk. Alright, so that took a hot minute, but we are finally done creating the second org here. And as you can see, as I mentioned before, it did end up changing the default username to scratch org demo 2, which is the second org that we have created. So I can see by opening the default org, whether or not I get a new URL or not for my new Scratch org. And I do indeed. You can see up here it says Ruby no software instead of the old one, which was, well, where are you? There it is. Instead of the other one, which was business velocity, because I run my business with velocity. But if I change this back, right, if I wanted to switch this easily, I can just go to this SFDX config.json file, change that to whatever, you know, alias I have for my Scratch orgs, and save it. And now if I open my default org, it is going to open my business velocity org, where I do business with high velocity. Okay, so it did it. All right, and if I wanted to delete one of these orgs, what I can do is there's a delete command. Yeah, you can either use SFDX delete default org, or you can just use SFDX delete org, and then you actually have to type in the name, like Scratch org demo. All right, so I will type that in, and I have to make sure, I'm very sure that I want to delete it, and I do indeed, so I'm going to hit continue, and it is going to go out and delete that from existence. And you can see it updated the file because now I have no default org. What I can reinstate that and put 2. And if I went back over here to good old business velocity, it has already logged me out. And if I tried to, you know, refresh this page, it doesn't exist anymore. My business velocity org is gone forever. So it's that easy to delete your orgs. Very simple, very quick, not a lot to it, and it's very easy to set them up, as we saw before. So, yeah, simple, easy, not really as complicated as it may seem. There's just a lot to learn. And it's different from the old processes. So real quick, now that we've done all this stuff in Visual Studio, let's just go into Illuminated Cloud 2, the world of wonder and ease and magic, and see how much easier it is to set it up in there and all that stuff. So let's go check it out. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is open up IntelliJ with the Illuminated Cloud 2 plugin installed. If you don't know what this is, no worries. I have a tutorial for just about everything these days. I'll link it above. You can go check it out. There's a tutorial for how to set up IntelliJ with Illuminated Cloud 2 for Salesforce development. So go check it out. If you've never heard of it, it is great. In my opinion, it's considerably better than Visual Studio Code. It's unfortunately not free, but it's very cheap. It's only about $90 a year. And well worth it for the many things you get with it that you don't get otherwise. So anyway, nobody's paying me to say that. Not that anybody would have a reason to anyway. All right, so okay, what do we do next here? So we've got Illuminated Cloud 2 up and running in IntelliJ, and we want to actually create a Scratch org. Well, the first thing that we're going to have to do is in Illuminated Cloud 2, you can go to Configure Application here. I believe you can also go to in Tools, Illuminated Cloud 2, Configure Application. Either way. And the first thing that you'll want to do is set up a connection to your org. So you can create a new connection if you've never done this before by clicking the Create Connection button here. And it will pop up this connection name and all this stuff. So you'll be able to choose your organization type, your login URL. If you have a My Domain, you might want to change this. You put in your username, password, security token, and choose the API version that you want to be working in as you develop things. You do need to set up this connection to the org that you've enabled DevHub in first, because you're going to create your Scratch orgs from this source org, basically. So you'll set up this connection. Pretty simple, pretty easy. Once you've done that, you don't ever have to do it again. It's set up in here. Unless you change your password or security token, you're done. Anyway, so once you've set all that up, you will go to create scratch org up here, this little DX button. And here you will be able to select any orgs that have the DevHub enabled on it, so that you can create scratch orgs in. So here's my coding with the Force one. And you have two options. You can load this from a scratch org definition file, or you can fill this out manually. Whatever works for you. If you've already got scratch org definition files filled out, then simple enough. I can figure out where my scratch org definition file lives here, and I can reveal it in File Explorer. And I don't think you can see this. I can just grab this URL, come back over here to IntelliJ and drop that in there. And then I can grab the JSON. And you can see it fills it out just the same way that it's been set up in Visual Studio Code. So if you already have the JSON file, you can do that. But as you notice down here, there's a bunch of other options that you have that you don't in Visual Studio Code, at least not without using the CLI, or maybe there's a plugin for VSCode that somebody's made that allows you to do all these things. But either way, you can change the org name and the alias for the org. So if I wanted this to be like Force Coding or something, and I wanted the alias to also be Force Coding, I could put a description for it. So I could say this is the scratch org for my Force Coding app. And you also have the ability here to define your edition just from a drop-down of all the available editions you can make with a scratch org. You can choose which release. Would you like a preview release? Would you like the previous release? Or would you like whatever the default release currently is? You can set your username, email, your country, your language, all from here. You can set the options for no namespace, no ancestors, include sample data. And you can do it all, as you can see, through a UI, right? You don't have to even create a scratch definition file at this point. And on top of that, it lists all of the features that we had to describe with JSON earlier, right? Previously, we had to just like write all these out in an array, but Illuminated Cloud 2 gives you the option to just select these, which is super nice, and it also gives you the descriptions that come right off of that features list that we looked at earlier that Salesforce gives you. So pretty cool. You can see it automatically checks those boxes from the load scratch org definition file that I loaded in. But super cool stuff. It also loaded in the settings that we have in that file. But you can see you can just place them in here if you want more. You'd love for this to be as nice as the features up here, and maybe someday it will be in Illuminated Cloud 2, but there's an enormous amount of metadata settings that could be used, so it'd be pretty tough to get all those outlined, unlike features that is still a lot, but not too many. There's also this Preferences tab. Just ignore this. When you used to set up scratch orgs near the beginning of the existence of scratch orgs, you would set up preferences, but this is not how you set them up anymore for most of them. I always just use settings now. Maybe there are some preferences that are still in use, but I don't think they are. I think you have to use a settings file now, not a preferences file. It'll throw in a weird error most of the time if you attempt to use preferences. So just ignore this. I feel like at some point this may go away, or maybe there's something I don't know about it that you guys can tell me I don't know about. I'd love to learn some more. Okay, and when you're done, you just hit OK, and it's going to go out and create that scratch org. Nice and simple. That was pretty quick and easy, I think. And if it doesn't take too long, we'll just keep talking about nothing. Otherwise, I'll cut this and come back. This normally takes about the exact same amount of time as it takes Visual Studio Code, which is, 1 to 2 minutes. Typically, every once in a while, it's much longer. It primarily depends on how many features you enable and what else you might be doing in your org when you're creating your Scratch org. But it looks like this is taking a hot minute, so I will cut this and come back. Oh, or never mind. Did it just as soon as I was about to cut it. And this is a good thing to point out. So this is not going to be as big of a problem in an enterprise org, but this is certainly a problem with the developer orgs, which is what I'm doing this in. There is a limit to the amount of Scratch orgs that you can have that are active in your org at the same time. For my developer org, that is 3. For your orgs, it's likely more along the lines of like 50-ish, typically. And that's normally plenty. So let's bring this over here and see how, if we wanted to delete these from the Salesforce UI, we could. Obviously, we can do this from the Salesforce CLI. We can also do it from Visual Studio Code. You can also do it from IntelliJ. But let's see how we would do this just from setup. So if we wanted to remove some Scratch orgs from setup that are still around that we don't need, you can actually just, in the app launcher here, type in active Scratch orgs, or just Scratch orgs, and active Scratch orgs should come up. And you can see I have 3 of them, right? I don't want all 3 of these. That's not helpful. I'm just going to go in here and delete this Scratch org. And that should get rid of it. So we'll delete this, and it should get rid of it. And if we go to Scratch org infos, you can now see that it was deleted, right? So it lets you know. It also has a history of all the Scratch orgs that have been in use, deleted, that are still active, all that kind of stuff. So cool. Let's give this another shot then. And try and create another Scratch org. So we'll just load the Scratch org definition file again. Hopefully I still have that URL. I do. And we will hit, I'm going to change this again to whatever it was. Actually, you know what? I like Coding Force better, so I'm going to go with that. And hit OK. And this time, it should hopefully create a Scratch org for me. But yeah, as you can see, it's pretty important to make sure that you do monitor your Scratch orgs. Make sure you don't go over your limit, know what your limit is. And make sure to delete and remove your Scratch orgs as soon as you're done with them. Sometimes that can be several weeks. Sometimes you're done with the Scratch org in a matter of hours. So make sure to clean them up. All right, so we've successfully created a new Scratch org, but how do we actually connect to that Scratch org in Illuminated Cloud 2 and start working in it? These are wonderful questions. So let's figure it out. Let's go to File up here and then New Project. And what we will do is click on Illuminated Cloud SFDX because we want a SFDX project template, ideally, if you're working with Scratch orgs anyway. And we'll call this, I don't know, Coding Force Scratch org. Oh, I normally don't use spaces. I don't have a namespace. You may have a namespace, especially if you're working with managed packages. And we'll just leave it with the standard template and not worry about the manifest. Yeah, okay. I didn't think I could use spaces. Not sure why I went with the spaces, but you know, oh well. And we'll hit next and finish. And eventually it'll open up someday. Every once in a while it takes a hot minute. There we go. This window. And now once you set up a SFDX project instead of just a normal project in IntelliJ, in my IntelliJ tutorial with Illuminated Cloud 2, I show you how to actually set up a normal project as opposed to an SFDX project. If you set up an SFDX project or Salesforce Developer Experience Project structure, then it's going to allow you to either create a scratch org or choose an existing one. So we'll hit OK. We've got our scratch org that we've already set up. If we didn't, we could just press this plus button right here to create a scratch org connection, just like we just did. And we'll hit OK. And it is basically just going to connect us to that org immediately. So there's really nothing else we need to do. It's already done. But if we want to open up our org, there is a hotkey to be able to do that. It is called it's Control-Alt-Shift-O. So we will do Control-Alt-Shift-O to open up our org, Coding Force. And it opened on a different screen, but here it is. It opened up my scratch org, which is pretty cool. And we can verify, I think that it's my scratch org because it's got Lightning Scheduler in it, which is pretty nifty. So as you can see, very simple to set up, really either way, whether you're using Visual Studio Code or whether you're using Illuminated Cloud 2. And yeah, easy to work with. There's a ton more I could go over with scratch orgs, if I'm being totally honest. There's obviously lots to learn about settings, lots to learn about all the different things that you can do with them. If you want to get really thorough with it, there's even more you can do with the CLI commands. But this gets you know, most of what you need. The one thing that I don't think I'm going to have time to cover in this particular video, maybe in another one at a later time, especially if you guys want to see more of this, is how to load data into your scratch org. I mean, obviously you could do it in some relatively standard ways, but you can use the CLI to load data into your scratch orgs as well. And you know, if you're using unlocked packages, there's ways to deploy unlocked packages. There's ways to deploy managed packages to your scratch org. So there's a lot of additional things that this video would be far too long if I went into, but maybe in later, smaller, more focused videos we can go over them. But hopefully this gives you at least a good reference of several things. Number one, you know, what have we gone over? We've gone over why you would want to use scratch orgs, what their importance is, why you would pick them over developer environments, how structuring your code in a modular fashion is beneficial, and how scratch orgs help with that. We've gone over how to set up scratch orgs, how to set up scratch org definition files, where to go to look for new settings, to choose your features, and we've seen how to actually create scratch orgs and open them in both Illuminated Cloud 2 and Visual Studio Code. So we've gone over quite a bit. You've got the basic tools to be successful with scratch orgs if you want to start diving into them. But again, if you guys want to see more about scratch orgs, you want to see more about loading data into them, setting up managed packages in them, all that kind of stuff, definitely let me know in the comments, and I will probably eventually get to it. I mean, it's only been a year. We've made over 60 videos, so yeah, I'm sure I'll make at least another 60. Anyway, that's it for today, guys. Make sure to go over to the community tab, vote on next week's video. Don't forget to do it. Subscribe if you like the channel, you want free certs, and yeah, hit the bell if you want to know when I make another one. So that's it. Thank you for watching, especially if you've watched this far. And I'll see you guys for next week's video. Bye-bye.